welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, November 11th. Happy Veterans Day. I'm Andrew Woolworth, and joining me are RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan, Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon, and in this first segment, John Waters. He's a Naval Academy graduate, a former Marine, author, and frequent contributor to RCP. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, John, you have a piece on the front page of RCP and on Real Clear Defense as well. It's about a fellow veteran of yours who you visited with down in Virginia. Tell us a little bit about what you observed there. And more broadly, how should Americans be thinking about Veterans Day 2025?
It's a great question. The piece I have is called Always Faithful, and that's the translation of a Marine Corps phrase called Semper Fidelis, and it means always faithful. It's something Marines say to each other. It's something that they say to remind one another of their service in the Marine Corps and maybe their brotherhood. But the piece itself is about the last reunion of a group of Marines who served in Vietnam in 1968 and 69, Mike Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment. If you know what that means. And these guys were led, about 200 of them, on that year-long plus deployment by Captain Paul K. Van Riper. At the time, he won the Silver Star, February 23rd, 1969, for heroic actions in a battle that took place against a regiment-sized North Vietnamese army force. Lost good Marines, but achieved the mission, stood on the objective at the end of the battle. And Paul K. Van Riper would go on in the Marine Corps to become a very distinguished person. He became a 3-star general, retired after 41 years of service. He was someone I heard about as a young Marine at the infantry officer course for not his combat exploits, but his brilliance as a tactician and an analyst. He played a part in a 2002 military exercise called Millennium Challenge, played a very critical role. He led the Red Team and kind of disrupted what the Pentagon had been planning to do in a Middle Eastern war, a fictitious or hypothetical scenario. He played a Red Team leader during that exercise. So I went out to General Van Riper's home in Williamsburg, Virginia. We had been corresponding for the last year and a half or so, and I'd gotten more and more curious about him and about Vietnam in particular. I'd read about all the other things in his life and in his career, but his Marines in Vietnam were on his mind. He gave me his oral histories, about 500 pages of them to read. And I was fascinated by, sections 2 and 3 of his early career. His first deployment as an advisor in 66, 67, and then his tour as a company commander in 68, 69. So I sat with him, toured his house, spent time with his daughter, and we talked for 8 hours, and I recorded, and it was all about the Marines of Mike Company. And he was planning his speech at that point in time to give, I think today, in their final reunion.
Wow. Great stuff. Tom, what do you think about on this day?
No, it was great. I commend the piece to all of our listeners and readers at Real Clear Politics. Johnny, you're a Marine, and yesterday was the 250th birthday of the Marine Corps. And we also ran a piece on Real Clear Defense, which you help edit and contribute to as well, by Gary Anderson talking about saying that the Marine Corps needs to evolve back to the future. So I'm curious, what do you think the state of the U.S. Marine Corps is on its 250th birthday, and what can we do better? What can be improved based on where things currently stand?
There are questions about the state of the Marine Corps, Tom. That's a great piece by Gary Anderson, and he's been a very vocal writer on Force Design 2030, a plan to modernize or technologize the Marine Corps, in which the Marine Corps gave up tanks, cannon artillery, gave up infantry Marines, in the hope or the ambition to make them more modern and light footprint for a future war in Asia. That's the concept behind Force Design 2030. Gary Anderson has been a critic of that. I think of a story, actually. I was talking to a retired general in writing this piece, and he said he had a meeting with Undersecretary of Policy Elbridge Colby and a deputy recently. And this young deputy, who had been a Marine Corps officer, said to the general, "The days of the John Wayne Marine Corps are over." And I thought, what a smear, number one, against the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is not a John Wayne outfit. It's an outfit of ordinary men and women who come together and are made into an extraordinary unit that never quits. But second, it's not for him to decide. The spirit of the Marine Corps is decided by those who sign up. And those boys and girls are from Oklahoma and Idaho and everywhere, all over the country. It's not for some person in Washington, D.C. to tell them who they can be. So I think there's a question of culture in addition to a question of assets and future war plans.
Andy, as you hear John talk, Captain Waters talk, you made a slight faux pas, I guess, among certain Marines. You said he was a former Marine. You can hear John Waters talk. There are no former Marines. There's Marines, and our friend Johnny is explaining that in a very eloquent way. John, I wanted to ask you, a broader question about Veterans Day, and I think most Americans who are thoughtful wonder about on this day what we owe veterans, what we owe the people who served in the military, and how we think about our country projecting force around the world. I mean, it should be a day of reflection, and I always go back to the words of and I'm interested in your thoughts, and Tom and Andy's too, of General Mark W. Clark, World War II general, who wrote in the preface to his book. He said, he led the campaign to liberate Italy from the Nazis. And he said, here was our conquest. They're on the soil of the United States Armed Forces, where the Roman legions march. Here was our conquest. And all we asked of Italy was a small pot of land to bury our dead. And what he was saying was that we don't go into the world to conquer and take people's property and take slaves and take land. We go to defend our national interests and liberate people. And Colin Powell used that phrase himself. He didn't attribute it to Mark Clark, but he didn't have to. I mean, people who follow the military knew who said it. And I think he said it at Normandy, and Powell sort of extrapolated to all U.S. wars. I was wondering, to me, that's the ethos of the U.S. military in my mind. And I was wondering, do you have cosmic thoughts like that yourself? And I was curious what Tom and Andy think too.
Well, no one's better at that than Carl, and on display in the forward to my book. I'm still grateful that Carl Cannon would put his pen to my book in the forward. But I think people who serve represent the best of us. That's a cliche that many of us say, but it's the truth. The history of our country begins in the heart of every man and woman. And for those who've served in the Marine Corps or the Air Force or the Army or the Navy, you've put those thoughts and those feelings into action. They become real. You've worn it. You've seen others sacrifice for it. It becomes visceral to you for the rest of your life. And so it's a story they should tell others. And I think veterans, in a sense, are an exemplar to the rest of our country of what it takes to love your country and never lose it.
John, I want to ask you about what you think of Pete Hegseth and the speech that he gave when he assembled all of the military brass from all over the world. He caught a lot of grief for that. This could have been done by Zoom and all of that. And even some of the, stuff that he talked about, but restoring sort of these standards. The folks that I talked to who were in the military, they loved it. They thought it was great. They appreciated it, but the media was a little bit less enthusiastic about it. What did you think?
I was fired up by it. I mean, I loved it. I love what Secretary Hegseth said in that speech about standards. The standards will not be lowered, and they will be combat standards, and they will be enforced. And I think if you're a military officer, particularly a senior officer, as they were in the room, you should feel invigorated by that. No more anonymous complaints. No more anyone undermining your command. This commander-in-chief and the Secretary of War, we have your back. I asked General Van Riper his opinion also, and he said, you can get back equipment, you can reorganize units, but if you've lost the warfighting ethos of the organization, I don't know how you get that back. I agree with him 100%.
Yeah. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I just want to tell you who we're talking to. We're talking to John Waters. He is a frequent contributor to RCP. He's a published author. He's got a novel called River City 1, which I highly commend to people as well. Carl, I think, was involved in that in some way. I'm not sure. Did you write the foreword to it? Or
Right.
Yeah. But, I'm curious about this piece in the on Real Clear Politics. And you're talking to Vietnam veterans, and we seem to think a lot about still World War II veterans. We're coming to the end of that life for those veterans. But What about Vietnam veterans in particular? I mean, they had a very different experience. We all know that. And when you meet with them and they reflect back on their time, their homecoming, that sort of thing, I'm wondering what you learned.
Pride, an incredible pride. And they were kind of having a lonely pride at a point in time, 1969 and beyond in our country, where it wasn't widely shared. They weren't victors like our World War II veterans, our heroes from the greatest generation. And this story kind of began for me with a character named Jim Meyer from Minneapolis, 77 years old, retired as a salesperson for 3M company based there in Minneapolis. In the mid 1980s, 40 years ago, Jim Meyer was going town to town in his job as a salesperson. And in the evenings after work, he would go to the phone book back in those days. And he would look for names in the phone book of Marines he served with in Mike Company in 68 and 69. This man was a Marine for roughly 1 year. That's hard for me to comprehend. I was there for 6. He was 1 year, 6 months or so in Vietnam. He was wounded roughly 1 year after he signed up, and then he was out back on the streets as a civilian and then taking up his college education at Southern Illinois. And so he was looking through the phone book to reconnect. He said he wanted to be with the Marines who were there with him, not just the Marine Corps ball, not just a gathering of veterans, but those who were there in Dodge City, Quang Nam Province, 68, 69. And eventually a sales trip took him to Quantico, and he was selling to a colonel. And the colonel said, "You served with Van Riper? He's next door. He's a general now." Jim Meyer went next door, met General Van Riper, was shocked at the number of colonels and general officers. Jim had only been a corporal when he was discharged from the Marine Corps, a squad leader at that. And they said, "Let's put our heads together and get a list and make this formal." And it started there in 1984, 85. 40 years ago, they started having formal reunions, and they've continued without fail every 2 years since then. So I think of these guys as a band of brothers. And to me, they've always been just as much a greatest generation as their fathers were, and an inspiration.
You know, John, as I hear you talk, I'm reminded of the book that you and I admire, The Nightingale Song, which was
100%.
written by Robert Timberg, who was, I knew him, he was my editor of the Baltimore Sun, former White House correspondent for the Sun, served in the Marines, was grievously wounded, and wrote a book about these Marines, Ollie North, Jim Webb, Poindexter, who am I forgetting? John McCain. McCain's kind of the hero of the book. These are the guys who graduated from the Naval Academy, I think the class of 68.
Yes.
And the Nightingale Song is an interesting title because you reminded me when you're telling the story of these Vietnam vets, John, a nightingale who's knocked out of its nest or blown away in a wind as a baby bird will never learn its song. And every nightingale's family has a distinctive song, a tune that only they sing. But a nightingale who's reunited with its clan as an adult nightingale will learn its song and sing its song incessantly and never stop singing its song. It kind of becomes annoying to the other birds. Well, in Timberg's telling, the nightingale's song is Ronald Reagan is the mama nightingale, and the nightingale's song the tune consists of these words: "Vietnam was a noble cause." And when he said that while running for president, veterans, they didn't have to be combat veterans of Vietnam. They didn't have to be Marines. Veterans all over this country thought, okay, he gets us. This guy, Reagan served stateside in World War II, like everybody in his generation. And everybody got that. And they thought, all right, here's a president who's worthy of being commander in chief. You reminded me of that. And a postscript of the story, Timberg was in the White House press briefing room one day, and Larry Speakes, who was the press secretary, was criticizing reporters the way a lot of the current press secretary does all the time. But Timberg stood up, trembling with rage, and said, "Larry, I will not have my patriotism questioned by the likes of you, Timberg." And Larry Speakes had not served, and he walked out. And it was the only time that I know of where a press secretary had to call a reporter privately and apologize.
Agree so much. Bob Timberg's book, The Nightingale Song, was formative for me. I love the book so much. Great reference.
Yeah. You know, a friend of mine, Al Santoli, did an oral history on Vietnam called Everything We Had, which is a great book, as long as we're talking about
behind me. I read it 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
yeah. So I keep up with Al, and we were talking the other day. You know, he talks very eloquently about the homecoming, and then about the sort of the turn with the Vietnam Memorial being built. But he's not quite satisfied with it. It's interesting. I mean, he he sort of feels like at the same time that it's important that we recognize that we don't feel sorry for them either. And he felt that that was sort of something that was happening. Did you get any of that from your the Vietnam veterans you met with, that they appreciate the appreciation they're being seen now, but they don't like being seen as victims?
I agree with that sentiment that Al expressed. And I went to his book, just an aside on that. I went to his book because it was an oral history. It was direct from the corpsmen and the enlisted Marines and the officers, 200 plus pages. I commend that book to the audience as well. I do not think they like to be cast as victims, as drug addled, as all these things that came out of, particularly 1969. There was one Marine in the piece who reflected that October 15th, 1969, he was recovering from shrapnel wounds from ankle to ear in the hospital, watching this day of protests on college campuses and streets in Washington, D.C., and he was angry. Why are they doing this? And it was an organized effort, of course, to protest the war. And shortly thereafter, President Nixon spoke and gave his silent majority speech, an interesting moment in history. 1969, in the recollection of the veterans I talked to, seemed like a turning point. Many of them felt that they left for the war in 67 or 68, and that there was some sense of unity and patriotism and support, and they came back in 69, and it was different.
John, you've been to the wall. What do you think of that memorial?
I think it's deeply moving, actually.
Yeah, me too.
And General Van Riper said, he's like, we went back to Vietnam and walked the ground, and it was fun. But if I go to the memorial, I'm moved by it. And I think it's because I've been told, he said, a symbol can do that to you.
Tom, what do you think of the wall? You've been there.
I have. Yeah. We took our kids there a few years ago and looked at went to all the memorials and yeah, I was moved too. I mean, all of those memorials, but that one in particular was very moving.
Well, the Korean War Memorial, the Frozen Chosen, that's sort of dedicated to the Marines, isn't it, John? And it's unlike most memorials, meant to be seen at night, actually, where those faces are lit up. Very haunting, isn't it?
Very much so. I agree.
Yeah, I covered one of the first stories I covered when I came to Washington was the building of the Vietnam War Memorial, and how controversial it was at the time. I think people don't quite appreciate how much furor there was at the time. And I talked to Jim Webb about it at the time, who I believe was against the memorial. I don't know.
He came around.
About it now.
He came around.
But it was just as it felt like the perfect extension of the Vietnam War from the point of view there was like huge division in the country over that memorial. And now, of course, when you go and visit it, it makes so much sense, at least to me. I mean, I find it the most moving memorial on the mall, and people should go down there if you haven't. This would be a good day to go.
Andy, every one of those names, it's actually it's a monument to the cost of war. I won't say the folly of war, but the cost of it, the tremendous human cost. Every name on there was 58,000 something. Yeah. Everyone had a family. Everyone had friends. There was one name on there I was too young, but he was a guy at our high school that I went to, and there's an award named after him. And it's in Sacramento. Everybody there knew his name, and we had assemblies for him. And it just reminds you, going to war is not a decision that our civilian leaders should ever take lightly.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, we just got about a minute left here in this segment, and I'm just curious, give us sort of the broader view. What is the state of veterans in America today? Hard to do in a minute, but give it to me.
That's a tough question. I think it's a time of pride. I think it's a time of transition, maybe from something that was to something that is. Maybe that's political, maybe that's cultural. I don't know. And maybe I'm just talking about myself, but it's a time of pride in service, pride in each other, pride in what we did and what we witnessed, and pride in our country.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm here with Tom and with Carl, and we've been talking to John Waters. He's a Naval Academy graduate, a Marine, not a former Marine. I've been corrected on that. He's a frequent contributor to RCP, and he's the author of River City 1, a novel which I highly commend to people. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics, and we'll be back right after this.
Bank of America just issued a warning about forced selling in the stock market. It's not because these companies are failing. It's because the structure is broken. They say if problems continue in the credit market, big investors like pension funds could be forced to dump stocks just to raise cash, not by any strategy, but because of panic. Here to explain what this means for your savings is Shannon Davis, CEO of American Alternative Assets. Shannon, why should this latest market warning worry Americans who are just trying to protect their retirement?
Tom, a very good question. It's because it's showing how fragile our financial system really is. One problem that is being really cornered is just the mass debt that we've got. The private credit, can trigger a major sell-off right now in our public stocks. It's about liquidity. And again, it comes back to our debt, and it's about how fast our confidence is starting to wane. When the institutions are in a pinch for cash, when they're in illiquid investments, which a lot are tied into pensions, especially with some of the things that Trump's allowed because they need more money to feed the beast, which is our stock market. When there's nothing that is liquid for them to pull out, they'll just sell whatever they can. And they'll sell in bulk. That's what we're seeing right now. And that's the warning sign that even Bank of America is telling Americans.
If you want to see what smart investors are doing to prepare, get the guide. Call 855-450-GOLD right now to get the guide. Or go to tomlovesgold.com right now. The guide is free. It explains why gold still matters, how debt, risk, and instability could affect your retirement, and what moves may make sense before the next storm hits. That's tomlovesgold.com. or call 855-450-GOLD right now.
Guys, President Trump, Donald Trump, sat down last night with Laura Ingraham of Fox News. It's a pretty tough interview. Laura asked him a number of questions, including about the economy. So here's just a little bit of the exchange, and here's Donald Trump on the economy.
The economy is the strongest it's ever been. You asked me, just to go back to the beginning of your question, you talked about prices. We're down on energy. We're down on interest rate. Interest rates are down despite the Fed. Now, if we had a normal person at the Fed would have really low interest rates, and we will soon have that. We'll have somebody that's.
Then why are people saying they're anxious about the economy? Why are they saying that?
I don't know that they are saying. I think polls are fake. We have the greatest economy we've ever had.
So, Tom, sounds a little deja vu there. It sounds like another president who thought the American people just didn't know how to read economic statistics, I guess.
Yeah, Trump's hilarious when he cites polls. We got the greatest polls ever. And they're like, well, what about these polls? Oh, they're fake. Polls that are not good for him are fake. Polls that are good for him, they're, right as rain. Look, he's got an issue that he has to deal with. I understand, I think, he wants to say, look, we inherited a mess from Biden. That's what Biden said when he inherited, from Trump, and it's what every president says. And they blame their predecessor for as long as they can get away with. I mean, Barack Obama blamed George W. Bush for 8 years, basically.
Well into a second term. That's
well
true.
into a second term. So, but at some point, you see it in the polls, like you only get so long, and then you own it. And so Trump is now almost a year into his second term, and he basically owns the economy. And I think that's so. Again, just saying things are going to get better, and by the time voters go to the polls in November 26th, that Republicans will be in good shape. That's what Mike Johnson told us last week. It's not a strategy. It's a hopefulness that may or may not be borne out, and I think Republicans are in danger of being a little bit relying too much in hope and not enough on addressing what's going on. And Trump was doing that last night, basically sort of waving away these concerns. I don't think people are anxious. And, we've got all this great stuff that, he called them goodies. I thought that was, we got all the more goodies, 4 years worth of goodies packed into this bill. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, all this stuff that are really going to kick in and people are going to feel. Maybe he's right. But at the same time, right now, voters are saying, look, stuff ain't that great. It doesn't feel that great. And, just sort of citing the statistics that you want to try and prove that things are great. That's what Biden did, and it did not work. And I don't know that it's going to work with Trump either.
Yeah. He called it a con job by the Democrats. That's what he said, and blamed the media too. Right?
He is right about that, though. The media, he does fight against a media that that does take Democratic talking points, that does craft the narrative that the Democrats want to set, that like everything's terrible and all this. So I understand that part of it. He is fighting against that. That part is true.
Carl, what did you make of that interview? It's pretty interesting.
There were two things about it that I was struck by, and the first was what you and Tom are talking about here is that he sounds so much like these other presidents, doesn't want to take accountability. Tom, he's been in office since January 20th. He's not even to his 10-month
10
mark.
months. Yep.
So I'd say beginning in the spring, he owns this economy. The inflation hit. The Democrats say inflation hit because of COVID. Certainly that was a factor. The other factor was the Democrats on Capitol Hill and the Biden administration spent money,
trillions of dollars of spending.
like it was monopoly money. And we're warned by Larry Summers and others the effect of this. But inflation now is about 3%. Gasoline prices continue to go down. The interest rate, I actually share the president's view of the Fed. I think Jay Powell should have lowered interest rates sooner and faster, but they're going down. Mortgage rates are now,
still at 6%.
It was like
6.2.
It was 7.7 or 7.8 when he took office at 6.2. And to President Trump's point, Bloomberg had a story yesterday. Scott Bessent pointed this out on Morning Joe this morning. Interest rates haven't come down much. Well, that's a significant drop, and they'd like to get them down. And the president's trying to get them even more.
Yep.
But the other thing is, and I'm interested what you guys think about this. Laura Ingraham did a real interview. Every once in a while, you see, I'm an evangelist for old-fashioned journalism. And when I say old-fashioned, I don't mean, I mean the best values of the old model, which is to be fair, to be tough, to be honest, to not be agenda-driven. It was like that woman who, reported on Barack Obama's famous gaffe about clinging to gays and religion or guns and religion or whatever, because you don't like gays. That story was broken by a Huffington Post reporter who was there and was sympathetic to Obama. I think she'd contributed to his campaign, but he said something that was newsworthy, and the instincts of 250 years of journalism, this was something the American voter needed to know, and she wrote about it. And I was thinking that watching Laura Ingraham last night. She's not trained as an objective observer. She's a columnist. She's a polemicist. She's a movement conservative. But when the president of the United States was saying things that are abject nonsense, she pushed back. She pointed it out. She conducted herself like a real pro, I thought. And so that's, Tom, we're always bashing the media. Maybe we should tip our caps when people do things right.
No, I agree. And we do. Look, there's liberal bias in the media. It's pervasive, all of that. But you do, when you get right-leaning figures that interview the president, they tend to go, kind of soft on him. And Laura didn't do that. I mean, I thought she was tough. She was fair. When he started trying to, wave stuff away, she corrected him. So it was an interesting interview.
Yeah.
She called him on that crazy 50-year mortgage idea of his too.
Well, I want to talk about that in a minute, but just to stay on the interview for a second, because he does this weave, right? And you saw it in the CBS interview over the weekend where he just, he sort of just is moving around so fast and talks over the reporter. And I will say that Laura Ingraham sort of stopped him in his tracks a couple times because some of the things he was saying were just,
So for our new listeners on the Megyn Kelly channel, so I've told this story before, but I interviewed President Trump in September of 21 at Mar-a-Lago, and of course I did what everybody does, which is I spent a week trying to figure out how I could craft these questions to really just get him to answer the question and not do the weave, right? And so, and I'm thinking I'm real smart and I've got him now, and if he says this, then I've got this response. And you sit down with him and you ask him a question. And I told people it's like riding a verbal bucking bronco. I mean, you're off and you're just, he's going and you're trying to get in. And you don't want to be rude, right? But you want to try and, establish some guardrails, and it's impossible. I mean, he's unmanageable in that sense. He says what he wants to say, and you can, I kept saying, well, Mr. President, let's go back and let me ask you again about this question. And, we were just off, and he covered, 7 subjects on one answer. I was just trying to get one specific answer out of him. So he's tough and he's tough to manage. And believe me, everybody who's interviewed him has tried to do it, and most of them unsuccessful. And I think Laura was probably one of the most successful in terms of getting him, to answer the questions that she wanted to ask him.
Yeah, I was taught by one of my journalist heroes, I won't say who it is on this, but he said, if you ask the question 3 times, you'll get the answer. He said, don't be afraid to ask the same question 3 times. But I don't think that would.
Well, you got to have a 90-minute interview with President Trump.
Yeah.
If you're going to ask him the same question 3 times.
All the good ones do that, though, Andy. I once asked George W. Bush a question about gay marriage, and I thought it was the perfectly constructed question, and took like 3 paragraphs, and I got Gavin Newsom in it. I got gay marriage. It was about gay marriage. I got the kids involved, like the children of gay couples, and how can you tell? And I ended up by saying, how can you tell these children that their marriage that's not in the interest of the state, that their children, parents can marry? And Bush looks at me and he goes, marriage between a man and a woman. Just waved his hand. That's the interest. And he came up to me a couple weeks later at some event and he goes, hey, Cannon, nice try on that gay question.
Well,
man.
Well, speaking of good questions, she did ask him also about this 50-year mortgage idea, which he proposed this first on Saturday in a Truth Social post. So here's a little bit of the exchange on the idea of a 50-year mortgage.
Your housing director has proposed something that has enraged your MAGA friends, which is this 50-year mortgage idea. So a significant MAGA backlash, calling it a giveaway to the banks and simply prolonging the time it would take for Americans to own a home outright. Is that really a good idea?
It's not even a big deal. I mean, you go from 40 to 50 years, and what it means is
50,
you pay something less from 30. That some people had a 40, and then now they have a 50. All it means is you pay less per month. You pay it over a longer period of time. It's not like a big factor. It might help a little bit.
Tom, what do you make of that?
First of all, are there 40-year mortgages that I'm unaware of? Is that a thing? Is that true?
Wait. You know what it was like, you guys? It was like that scene in Forgetting Sarah Marshall where Russell Brand says, he's breaking up, and he says to what's the name of the protagonist? Jason. Anyway, he says,
Jason Segel.
Yeah, I don't know how you did it. I mean, I wouldn't say it's like serving under Hitler. I wouldn't say Hitler, but he goes, Goebbels maybe. Yeah, it was like being on holiday with Hitler. So he said Hitler, then he denied it. So Trump says 40 years to 50. She corrects him 30. He goes, yeah, well, 30. Oh, and then a 40-year mortgage.
40 and then 50.
He goes back to 40.
Yeah. So, I don't think there are 40-year mortgages. I think Laura tried to point that out to him. But I mean, the idea is, and he tried to wave this way, and then he said, well, look, it might help a little bit, but it's really not. He kind of just downplayed the whole idea that this wasn't like the big idea, the silver bullet that was going to save everything. But the point is, I think someone calculated like you pay close to $100,000 more in interest over, by extending it from a 30-year to a 50-year. And that is that's why banks would love this. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, if the idea is to make payments less, why not make it a 70-year mortgage or a 100-year mortgage? I mean, what if
100-year mortgages,
100-year mortgage. That's right. I think it's a non-starter, honestly. I don't know that people are going to sign up for this. And so I don't think it's going to be a real factor. I think he was just kind of this is what Trump does. He throws stuff out to see, like, maybe it'll stick, maybe it won't. Is it going to, is the balloon going to rise or is it going to fall, fall to earth? And I think that's what he's doing here.
I was sort of surprised at the pushback it got, though, Carl, because I mean, here's my point of view. At least I think it's an idea that's worth considering. I mean, what's magical about a 30-year mortgage? Why not a 40-year mortgage? Why not a 50-year mortgage if it lowers your monthly payments?
Or 60 or 70 or 80.
Yeah.
Well,
is that the argument?
We're going off the rails here, guys. Here's the deal.
It's another choice.
If you want to help
for a consumer,
if you want to help homeowners, there are things you could do. You want to help the American consumer. You could cap the rate that credit cards can the banks can charge on credit cards. You could have a usury law. It could be 14% instead of 29.5%.
Okay, Liz Warren.
Wait, yep. I'm with her on that. You could make any mortgage assumable, and FHA loans are assumable. You could do that. You could make it easier for people to get bridge loans to take an assumed loan. There's all kinds of creative things you could do. You could reduce the regulation to build houses in places like California. Some of these cities are doing this. You could make, mother-in-law cottages, whatever they call them. Minneapolis is doing that. Other places. There's a lot you can do. This is kind of a throwaway line. We've probably spent too much time on it. But Andy, my point is there are things that have been proposed that would help consumers more than they would help banks. And I think whether you're a progressive Democrat or a MAGA Republican, you'd go to those things first.
Well, my only point is there's nothing magical about 30 years. And
you're the last free market capitalist left. So I
might be.
Yeah,
I might be. But it seems to me that if you can have a fixed rate and an ARM, and if the right thing for you would be as a young person, take a 50-year mortgage, it would lower your monthly payments. And if you got it at the right time and interest rates were low, it might be a very wise investment long term. Tom? What are you telling your kids about 50-year mortgages?
Well, it's also one of those things too. I mean, you talk about golden handcuffs. I mean, you get locked in, interest rates go up, and suddenly, you're stuck. I mean,
but only for 50 years, Tom.
Only for 50 years. Yeah.
Randy's scenario.
There's a double-edged sword there.
In a bad house, in a bad part of
let
town.
You refinance that at some point.
With bad schools, but you got your 50-year mortgage. So.
All right. Well, guys, I can see that as Carl points out, I may be the last free market capitalist, at least on this panel. Maybe not in the world. I don't know. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after these words. Guys, the Democratic infighting over the filibuster in the Senate continues. And Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is taking a lot of flack. Here's Congressman Ro Khanna of California on what he thinks should happen next in the Senate.
Well, first of all, some of the senators who voted yes were asked explicitly today, was leadership consulted or did you do this rogue? And they all said leadership was consulted. So he gave the green light for this deal. And anyone who's covered Congress or been part of one of these bodies knows how this stuff works. If Schumer really didn't want this to happen, he could have at least come out publicly and said these folks are defying what I want. But he didn't do that. He was basically orchestrating a deal, and that I respect Senator Schumer's role in the Biden administration. He was critical on the CHIPS Act. He and I co-led that together. In the House, in the Senate, he was critical on the Inflation Reduction Act. He was critical on infrastructure. This is not taking away from him, but he's just not up for the fight that we have right now. And it's time for him to retire.
So, Carl, at the end of the day, it's time for him to retire. That's the conclusion that Ro Khanna has reached. Is that the sentiment is that sentiment widely held in the Democratic Party right now?
He apparently is widely held in the Progressive Caucus. I've never heard a House member of a party calling on the Senate Majority Leader or Senate Minority Leader of his own party to step aside. That's a new one on me. But these progressives, these young progressives, are feeling their oats. I think they've got the passion and the energy within the Democratic Party. There's some evidence that they're right, but you notice what they never say, and it's not just the young progressives. Bernie Sanders yesterday, they never say what their end game was here. So Chuck Schumer has capitulated. So we've given in to Trump. So this is terrible. We have to fight Trumpism. They use all these vague phrases, but what was their idea of how long Americans should go without food stamps because of the Democrats' filibuster? How long federal workers should not be paid? How long the air traffic control system should be, rendered overstressed to the point of danger in the skies? How long the United States military would be compromised because paychecks and funds weren't going out. They never say. Were they willing to do it indefinitely because they don't like Trump? I think it's an incoherent and fundamentally irresponsible way to govern. They lost the vote in the House on this Medicaid money and on the supplement the insurance supplements to underwrite Obamacare. They lost that vote. And then they turned around and shut down the government while blaming the Republicans for it. And when President Obama was in office and he had majorities in both Congress, he told Eric Cantor and John Boehner to their face, he said, elections have consequences. Well, elections have consequences for the Democrats unless they lose the election. Then they're willing to use guerrilla tactics, the filibuster, which they have excoriated as undemocratic for years, in order to shut the government down. To me, it's an unsustainable position. But as long as they use Donald Trump's name in there, they get away with all their supporters and half the media.
Yeah. So this moves to the House, Tom. Next, I guess it's tomorrow they'll be voting in the House, assuming that everyone can get on airplanes and get back. I guess that's
right.
That's kind of a question. But is the shutdown really done, do you think, at this point? I mean, isn't this going to pass the House, don't you think?
Sure. Yeah, no, and Trump's going to sign it. I mean, the question is, it only gets us through January 30th. Mm-hmm. And then we got to go through this whole thing again. Yeah, it's like, okay, well, are things going to change? How are they going to change between now and January 30th? Trump said he was asked this by Laura Ingraham last night, and he said, well, we're trying to put it in the bill that you can't do this anymore, can't do it again. Not exactly sure what he means by that. But look, Chuck Schumer's in trouble. I mean, he just is. He is, you see these shifts, and he just happened to be maybe the wrong guy at the wrong time, in the wrong position, because he did, I think Ro Khanna's right. I mean, I think Chuck Schumer, if he didn't want this to go forward, he would have come out publicly and said, look, I don't want this to happen. These senators are doing this of their own accord. I've advised them not to do it. And that's not what he did. He came out and made a statement of his own. I'm not voting for this, but everybody else is kind of free to do what they want. And so he is catching a ton of flack. And, he's not up for re-election until 28, but I suspect that, he's going to be, if they do have elections in 26, mm-hmm. If Democrats, they're going to have to choose a leader, and I suspect he's probably there'll be someone that will challenge him,
right?
And so he may not be long for his leadership position, and he may not be long for shortly after that. He may not be long for the Senate itself.
Yeah,
Tom and Andy, doesn't it remind you of how MAGA world turned on Mitch McConnell, who'd done everything Republicans asked him to do for 20 years, and then suddenly he made a couple of responsible statements, and then he's out. He's out of favor.
Well, I think on this, I mean, Schumer voted for the bill the first time around, right, to keep the government open, and this time I don't know. I think he sort of did shirk his leadership role a little bit here. Anyway, I want you to hear what Hakeem Jeffries said about.
But when
Chuck
you say
Schumer.
he shirked his responsibility, what do you think he should have done?
Well, listen to this soundbite, and then we can discuss.
Okay, good.
Listen, Leader Schumer and Senate Democrats over the last 7 weeks have waged a valiant fight on behalf of the American people. And I'm not going to explain what a handful of Senate Democrats have decided to do. That's their explanation to offer to the American people. What we're going to continue to do as House Democrats, partner with our allies throughout America, is to wage the fight, to stay in the Coliseum.
So he's staying in the Coliseum, Tom. Spartacus too.
Spartacus too. I think he meant the arena, but yeah, look, I mean, the idea that, they waged this valiant fight on behalf of the American people, to Carl's point, I mean, they were, for the last 5 days, they were screeching about how, wow, people, kids are going hungry, and, planes are falling out of the sky or about to, right? And they put the American people through 7 weeks of hardship. And at the end of the day, basically didn't get anything more than was offered to them at the beginning of this process to start with. So they didn't accomplish anything other than to show their base that they are willing to fight Trump and fight authoritarianism. It was all posturing. It was all symbolism. It was all virtue signaling. And so, but I mean, again, Andy, how did Chuck Schumer shirk his duties here? What would if you were advising Chuck Schumer, what would you have advised him to do?
I guess I would have advised him this. I would have said, you're either in or you're out, and you're the leader, so lead. I think what he tried to do, where, as Carl pointed out, he said he didn't vote for
Have it both ways.
Yeah, but couldn't lead, couldn't corral his eight senators into a position that he himself says he defends, and instead sort of allowed the people to wander off the Democratic reservation. That's not what a Senate minority leader does. Carl?
Well, the days where Lyndon Johnson could physically threaten people to get him to vote, those days are gone. And that's not how Congress works anymore in either chamber. So he couldn't force them to do anything. What a real leader would have done, in my humble opinion, is tell his conference, listen, I don't control this body. We're not going to use the filibuster to shut down the government. And here's why. Because we screamed like crazy people a few years ago when the Republicans did that, and we look like jackasses. We look like hypocrites. We look like people who don't believe
that would
in
have been leadership as well.
Yeah.
I would accept that.
Okay.
But I think it's one or the other. You can't be in the middle. Anyway, I want to talk. There's an interesting piece on the front page of RCP today that people should read. It's from the Washington Examiner. The headline is Democratic Socialists Quietly Capture City Councils Across America. And Tom, the article points out that 1/3 of Portland, Oregon's city council is now made up of active DSA members, Democratic Socialists of America. Minneapolis has 4 DSA members out of 13 on its city council. And this is sort of a quiet revolution. They say as of 2025, there are about 250 Democratic Socialists in public office, 90% of whom were elected after 2019. Democratic socialism on the march in America, not just in New York City.
Well, in Seattle, where Tom grew up in Washington, outside Seattle, there's a mayor's race there. I think the votes are still being counted, and the Democratic Socialists came within. She's either going to win or come within a whisker of winning against a very, very left-wing mayor.
Yeah, there was also a piece that we ran on RealClearPolitics the other day. It was the front page of the LA Times talking about how the Democratic Socialists, the DSA, is organizing to try and flex their muscles and take more control over Los Angeles as well. So this is something that I think people should be aware of, and certainly Republicans. It reminds me of how Soros managed to get all these prosecutors elected all across the country while Republicans were kind of like not minding the store. And he came in and flooded these local races with the kind of dollar amounts that you hadn't even seen before, and overwhelmed and suddenly changed the face of these major cities across America. Same thing is now happening with the DSA. They're very good at organizing, and again, in low turnout elections when people aren't paying attention, it's not that hard actually to get enough votes to get some of these people on these city councils, on the school boards. And next thing you know, they've captured those institutions and they're off and running. So,
Carl,
Andy, it's a novel idea to governance. So we've had very liberal city councils and very liberal mayors in all these states. And what's happened is the education system, public schools has declined precipitously. Crime has risen. You have all these problems. So the voters are saying, okay, I guess we'll get even more. We'll go even further left. And it seems like an odd corrective to me, actually. But as Tom points out, it's not a rational decision being made, by an individual. They're out organizing their opponents, and they're also offering, in many cases, young, idealistic, and very charismatic candidates.
Yeah, I think there's 2 elements of it, and one is that these are young, idealistic, and very good at social media and that sort of thing, just like Mondami. I mean, Mondami is sort of the model here.
Well, AOC is the prototype.
Yes, yeah, but I guess I'm just saying that one thing about socialists, they do know how to organize themselves, if nothing else, and I'm not surprised that they're doing this well. Although, to your point, it seems weird that this would be the direction people would go in when they have been in these big cities, have been ruled by leftists anyway, and you're going further to the left. It's not really a corrective in my view.
Community organizer was never considered something that you'd put on your resume for why you should hold high public office or even low public office, but it was on Barack Obama's resume.
That's right. It worked for him. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back here tomorrow, and we hope to see you then.